Welcome back to another episode of Sports-Fixx. I'm your host, Carson Becker. We are back talking about another week of college football. Rivalry weekend this past weekend, it did not disappoint. There were a ton of great games, and it really threw a couple of teams in bad spots. It changed up the playoff a little bit as well, most likely here. So we'll see kind of what happens with the playoff selection coming on tonight, and we'll see kind of what goes on with that. But starting off with the games, kind of get straight into it here. Starting off, Texas A&M versus Texas. Texas A&M looking to keep their undefeated season alive, get to the SEC championship, but Texas has other plans, and Texas ends up winning this game at home. We knew it was going to be a tough game for Texas A&M going into Texas, play for a chance to play for that SEC championship, which they haven't been to in some years now. But once again, Texas, when they've run the ball well, Arch Manning has played a lot better, and the team has looked a lot better. And so, once again, they ran the ball well, and Arch Manning only needed to throw for 180 yards and a touchdown. They put up 27 points, good enough to beat that Texas A&M team. Only giving up 17 points. Marcel Reed didn't have his best game in this one, and Texas A&M will no longer play for an SEC championship, but they will still be in a playoff spot. So not too much trouble for them. They'll still be in a playoff spot, still in a good spot. Finish the season 11-1, just not going to play for that SEC championship this coming weekend. So, still a very good team in Texas A&M. Didn't have their best game. Knew it was going to be a tough game going into Texas and winning that one with their undefeated season on the line. So, very good game there. Very good resume as well, sitting there for them, for Texas A&M. Also, Texas has a very good resume. Do they make an argument now to be in a playoff spot, right? So they beat Oklahoma 23-6. They beat Vandy, another team that's just outside of the playoff looking in, who also feel they should be in the playoffs as well. They now beat Texas A&M at the very end of the season at home. Third team in the country, one of the best teams in the country. People were making an argument for them to be the number one team in the country. So, do they make a pretty good argument? I think they make a good argument, Texas, for being in. And I don't think they're not getting in because of the Ohio State loss, like some people are saying. I think it's more about that Florida loss. Now, they did lose in Gainesville, so it was a little bit, but they lost to a very not great Florida team. And so I think that's the big thing keeping them out. I know they still have a very good resume, still have a bunch of good wins. They have a good loss against Ohio State, the best team in the country at the moment. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they snuck in. I would be surprised if they snuck in. I don't think they sneak in. I think there's just too many good teams ahead of them, and they do make a very good case for getting in, but I think there's just too many good teams, and with the ACC champion most likely getting in unless Duke wins it, I think they're just too far out looking in at this point, and they're not close enough to get in at this point. So I don't think they get in, but it was a pretty good season. The Arch Manning struggles at the beginning of the season is really what kept them out. That Florida loss hurt them a ton, especially with Florida not being good at all this season. So that really just killed their whole season. So I don't see them getting in. Another great game from Rivalry weekend, Georgia versus Georgia Tech. We saw it last year. It was a great game last year. Went into a bunch of overtimes. This game didn't go into any overtimes, but still was a very close game. Georgia Tech, big problem for them. Couldn't get the ball in the end zone. They end up with 9 points, 3 field goals, and, that's just not going to beat a good team like Georgia. It's not going to. Georgia didn't look great in this game, but it is a rivalry game, so you can't hate on them too much for that, but they do end up getting the win 16-9. Not Georgia's best performance here going into championship weekend, but look for them to look a lot better next week against Alabama in that championship weekend game and the SEC championship game. So, another game, Ole Miss beat up on Mississippi State. Not too much to talk about there. Kind of figured Ole Miss would beat up on Mississippi State. Mississippi State had a really good season, but we kind of knew at this point that Mississippi State wasn't nearly as good as they were showing they were at the beginning. Ole Miss has looked great all season, and you guys have heard it by now you guys have heard the news. Lane Kiffin takes a job at LSU. Another bad departure, as people like to say, with Lane Kiffin. And he will not coach them in the playoffs, which they are going to be in the playoffs. They actually secured a home playoff game in the playoffs. So he won't be coaching that. He's down there in LSU. There were some rumors going around that he didn't even tell the players. I don't know if that's true. There were people apparently leaving meetings, getting mad and stuff. So not a good departure from Ole Miss. Not a good look to not coach your team through a playoff spot. Honestly, I didn't expect him to leave. I thought he was going to stay at Ole Miss. I thought Ole Miss was a great job for him. And especially this year with them having such a good record and them being in a playoff spot. They knew they were going to be in a playoff spot at that point. After beating Mississippi State, they were going to be in and most likely have a home game. I really didn't think he would leave in the middle of the season. Now, he did come out and say that he wanted to coach the playoffs, but as an athletic director, are you going to let a coach coach your team in the playoffs when you know he's going to leave? I mean, so he won't be coaching. They will have a home playoff game, but they win that one. Then you got Ohio State finally gets a win against Michigan. 4 years. Took them 4 years, but nobody wants to talk about Ohio State's 10-year dominance before that and their dominance for the last 100 years. But Michigan fans love to bring up these past 4 years. But Ohio State finally gets it. Sayin looked great. Both Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate both played in this game. Both played very well. I think they both had a touchdown. I believe Jeremiah Smith did. Carnell Tate, I think, had the long touchdown. So, very good game for Ohio State. Defense, only gave up 9 points. Still looked like one of the best defenses in the country. Michigan kind of got going in the beginning. They ran the ball pretty well. But the big thing was Michigan's quarterback. I mean, either they don't let him throw, or they just don't trust him enough to throw. Whatever it is, he only had 8 completions in this game. I think he only threw 18 passes. So either they don't trust him, or he's just not that great. I think he hasn't looked great all season. Really, he hasn't really been that impressive for the $10 million that they paid him. But that's just my opinion. Another big point: Ohio State ran the ball probably better than they had all season, which was a huge point in these last 4 years playing Michigan, where they couldn't run the ball basically at all, and it was basically any time whichever team ran the ball better would win the game. And it was Michigan in those past 4 years, but Ohio State really ran the ball pretty well. I mean, it was hilarious. Brutus crossing out the M in the end zone and during the game just shows how deep this rivalry really is. And it was a really good game. Ohio State looked really good. Michigan, again, just didn't look that great. Final score 27-9, as Ohio State will now go on to play in the Big Ten Championship for the first time since 2020. And they are going to play Indiana, who also won this past weekend, beat up on a Purdue team that's just really not that good. But that should be a great championship weekend game there this Saturday, so look out for that one. Then you got the Iron Bowl, Alabama versus Auburn, another classic Iron Bowl game. Ended up being close, even though Auburn really seemed to have little to no offense for most of this game. I feel like watching this game, you saw Auburn, they would get an explosive play, get down into the red zone, and then a couple plays later get into the end zone. But they never really had a long, methodical drive, and turnovers killed them in this game. The pick on the 30-yard line killed them. The fumble at the very end of the game ended the game, basically. So, I mean, a ton of drops from Auburn also was just not very helpful. But somehow, some way, they stayed in this game for long enough to make it a game. Their defense was probably the best part of their game in this one. Ty Simpson threw for 3 touchdowns, but he only had 122 passing yards. Alabama does win this one 27-20, and I think Alabama's defense really deserves props in this one. Not giving up a lot of points, giving up 20 points, getting the 2 turnovers, which were huge in this game. The fumble at the very end basically ended the game. The pick that came off the drop from the Auburn wide receiver was big in that game, where they were driving down the field. They had a chance to, I think that was a chance to tie the game up late in the fourth quarter. So maybe early fourth quarter, but it was a good game for both those teams. Another great Iron Bowl. Alabama wins it once again. LSU versus Oklahoma, defensive battle. Like I said, if you watched the last episode, I said take the under. I said it was potentially to take the under. The under was like 36.5, which is just insane. But it did hit that as the score was 17-13. Very much a defensive battle. Oklahoma survives this one in a game they really didn't play that great. LSU also didn't play that great. A lot of defense, not a whole lot of offense with these two teams, and that's kind of been their story all year. Oklahoma looking at a playoff spot at this point. They're not going to be in the SEC championship. They're looking at a good playoff spot there. So look for Oklahoma to continue into the playoffs as they ride this win. Next, you got Vandy going into Knoxville and beating Tennessee. And this was a game in the first half. You really thought it was going to be a really good game. And then the second half opens up and that offense just takes off. So look out for that. It was a just great game from Vandy's offense in the second half. I don't think they only allowed 3 points in the second half. Is actually, I thought they didn't allow a point. They only allowed 3 points in the second half. So really just all-out dominance in the second half to go into Knoxville, a very tough stadium to play, rivalry weekend, tensions are high, you go in and you only allow 3 points in the second half, you end up beating the team 45-24, and yeah, I mean, you hear Vandy talking about trying to get into a playoff spot, they make a relatively good case as well, but I think their losses are going to hold them back. I don't see them getting in either. I think Texas has more of a chance to get in than Vandy at this point, but they go in and win 45-24 as they beat their rival, Tennessee, in-state rivalry there. Another in-state rivalry, you got UVA beats Virginia Tech and advances to the ACC championship for the first time since 2019. Wasn't much of a game in this one. UVA was pretty dominant. They will play Duke in the ACC championship, which means the doomsday scenario is back. If Duke were to win the ACC championship, it would now be North Texas would be the 11th seed, and I believe it would be JMU would be the 12th seed if both those teams go and win their conference, of course. So a whole lot of crazy stuff could happen here at championship weekend if Duke was to go and win the ACC. If not, obviously, UVA gets into the playoff and they're the 11th seed, and whoever the next North Texas most likely is the 12th seed. But Duke is in because SMU lost to Cal, who was not a great team this year. But so SMU really ruining their chances in the last game of the season there, and so that's all the games we'll talk about rivalry weekend. It's a great weekend. We got championship weekend coming up here this weekend, so that should be also pretty great. You got Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Indiana, 2 great games. You got Texas Tech, BYU, a rematch from earlier in the season. That should also be a pretty good game in the Big 12 championship. So we'll see how all those games change the playoff picture here, and we'll see if any teams maybe sneak in, if maybe something happens here. We'll see, but that's all I'll talk about in this episode. Of course, look out for the next episode with my playoff reaction to the rankings tonight. I'll do a reaction video for tomorrow and post that, see all the new matchups, all the new rankings of everybody, and see what changed from this past weekend. But that's all I have for this episode of Sports-Fixx. Thank you all for watching. I am Carson Becker, and I will see you next time.